Today I'm looking at the Nikon FM3A, which was Nikon's last manual focus 35mm SLR film camera. They produced it between 2001 and 2006, and it was the end of the line of the compact series of Nikon film cameras, which began with the FM in 1977. So I'm going to show you the features and controls of this camera and point out differences or advantages of this over the FM2 FE2. Got the manual with it. It's a nice little manual, goes through all settings and fittings and blah blah blah. First of all, I want to show you the difference size wise with a professional series Nikon camera. This is the Nikon F3, which is a manual focus SLR, and you can see the FM3A is slightly smaller. I'll show you that from the top. I'm not going to point out differences in specifications, etc. I just want to show you the differences in size. So you may not think that the FM3A is as compact as what you first thought, but it is a nice size as regards handling, etc. So the good thing with the FM3A, it's a what we call a hybrid camera. It does use batteries for the meter all the time, and also if you use it in aperture priority mode, auto exposure, it uses battery to fire the electronically controlled shutter, and it uses quartz timing. But if you select a manual shutter speed on the dial, then the shutter speeds are fired mechanically, so you then only need the battery for the meter, or obviously if the batteries fail you can still use the camera with all the shutter speeds from 1 to 4 thousandths of a second, as long as you can judge the correct exposure, of course. So it's a fixed eye level prism camera with 93% frame coverage when you look through the viewfinder. It's got a through the lens centre weighted full aperture exposure meter, and it uses SPD cells, and it's got 6% of the meter's sensitivity concentrated on the 12mm reference circle that you see through the viewfinder. So I'm going to go through all the functions and controls and point out any differences between this, or advantages of this over the FE2 FM2. Some people do call it an FE3, by the way. So I'm going to start off with the shutter button and advance lever, which is very similar. The shutter button is very similar to the FE2 FM2. It's got a threaded centre for an AR3 cable release, and at the moment it's in a locked position. You can't fire the shutter even if the it's cocked, and that's down to the feature of the advance lever. You need to pull the advance lever to the standoff position, which releases the lock, and then when you half press the shutter button the meter becomes active, and obviously when you fully press it, it fires the shutter. To cock the shutter, you just move the advance lever all the way around. Shutter is cocked. You can do it in short strokes as well, but you still have to go right up to the top limit to do it that way. Batteries, 3 types of batteries you can use. They fit in the bottom. You can use a 3-volt lithium battery, which I've got fitted, or you can use 2 silver oxide batteries, SR44s, or you can use 2 alkaline batteries, which are LR44s. So this is the 3-volt lithium battery. As regards number of rolls or film rolls you'll get from the batteries, Nikon say it's about 100 or so with the lithium and silver oxide ones, and about 45 with the alkaline ones. So the battery goes with the plus symbol at the top. Just put the cover back on. And the base is very similar to the FM2, FE2, even the FM. They take the same motor drive, which is the MD12. So going back to the top plate, you've got the frame counter, which goes up to 36, but it will allow you to keep advancing the film beyond that point, and it resets to S when you open the camera back. And next to that you've also got a multiple exposure lever, and the way that operates is it's very nice on this camera. It's very same as the FM2 FE2. We just hold the lever, and then when you advance the film, you can see the frame counter's not advancing, but it still cocks the shutter so you can fire another shot in the same frame. So you're going looking at the shutter dial, which is a mix between the FE2 FM2. Because it uses aperture priority mode, it's got a mode which it locks on, and then you've got the manual setting. You have to press in the button, move the dial, and then you can set from 1 up to 1/4000th of a second. And you've also got a B mode, and in B mode the meter doesn't work in the display. On the FE2 the actual dial went from, also included 2, 6 and 8 seconds, which isn't included on here, and that's mainly because when you flick it to the shutter speed range, it's using the mechanical method of firing the shutter, which you can tell. I fire the shutter at 1 second in mechanical mode. You can hear the clockwork mechanism inside operating it. So in aperture priority mode, it's a stepless electronically controlled shutter, but obviously in off the A it's mechanically timed. And a visual display difference between this and the FM2 or FE2 is that the shutter dial is actually higher than those models, and the nailed part covers the whole dial itself, which gives better grip, of course. Moving next to the flash shoe, and it's got some extra features on the flash. We've got a flash positioning hole for the later flashes that incorporate a little pin that you lock it on, it puts the pin into that hole, which obviously fastens it firmly to the hot shoe. And also on the FM3A, a new feature for these models is through the lens flash, which the FM2 didn't have, although the FE2 did, and that's with this extra contact on the hot shoe. You've got a flash ready light inside the viewfinder, which obviously it's not on the FM2, is actually on the edge of the finder, whereas on this model it's inside on the actual viewfinder display. It uses off the film metering for the flash exposure. Now, there's actually an extra SPD cell in the bottom of the mirror box, which you can't really see. Moving over to the rewind crank. This is the rewind crank and lever for rewinding the film. And next to that is a exposure compensation dial, and use that by pressing in this little button and turning the dial, and you've got settings in third stops from +2 down to -2, and when you've got the exposure compensation dial off the 0 mark or no compensation, you see a red warning light in the viewfinder as well to warn you that that feature has been set. Around that as well, the rewind crank is the ISO or ASA speed setting. Now manually you can set that from 12 all the way up to 6400, and basically just lifting that up and turning. But another first on this range of cameras is the DX setting, where you can set it on that, and when you load DX film it automatically reads the film speed off the sensors inside. Now if it's set on DX as well, you do get a warning in the viewfinder if you've not got film loaded or it can't read that. When you activate the meter, it flashes the exposure compensation and flash ready lights in the viewfinder to let you know that you've not got film loaded, or as I say, it can't read it. Now to open the camera back, slightly different on this model. The FE2 and FM2 had a little lever that you had to pull first, but on the FM3 you just pull the rewind crank up, and I find it actually a little bit awkward because on the I had a F301, F501 that uses a similar system, and Nikon put two little cutout grooves on this rewind crank which help you get your fingers into it to pull it. On this model there isn't any, but it's still okay, it works okay. So you can open the back. Now another big new feature of this camera, which you may have already noticed, is it's got a film confirmation window, so you can actually see when a film cartridge is fitted, which is something I can't understand why they never put on the very early cameras. And because of that, it's got some extra foam around that area to obviously stop any light getting in. You've also got some contacts here for the MF16 data back, and the shutter is like the FM2, the later version, which is a aluminium vertical travel focal plane shutter. Just going back to the back again, there's actually another feature here which wasn't on the earlier cameras. It's a film anti-curl roller, which apparently stops the film curling up around the advance and sprockets inside. So move over to the left hand side. This where you've got the gold plated DX contacts which read the film speed setting, and you've also got a tab here, it's like a spring tab, which holds the cartridge in place, and I think what it's mainly for is holding it firmly so it makes good contact with the DX contacts, otherwise you'd get the lights flashing inside. So I'll just show you how to fit a film. So you pull the rewind crank lever all the way up, drop in a film cartridge, you can then put the rewind crank back down, pull over the film leader, and you just need to basically drop it into one of these slots, and it's got little hooks inside there which grab the film very easily and quickly, and you can start advancing the film, and it's already engaged in the sprockets. You can wind on frame, just fire the shutter. So now I can close the back, and you can actually see the film cartridge fitted, and it's got it on DX, so it will automatically read that film speed as 200 ASA. And once the film is, the back is closed, you can lift up the rewind lever, turn it in the direction of the arrow to take up any slack in the film. You can feel that getting tight, and then if you look at the frame counter, which is on S, you need to advance the film to frame counter 1, and as you're doing that as well, you should notice that the rewind crank is turning, which shows that the film is loaded correctly. So once you get to position 1, you're then in position 2 obviously start taking pictures, but the meter does work from when you insert the film. On the FE2 it was slightly different, it fired the shutter at 1/250th of a second until it got to frame counter 1, so in theory you can actually get more shots out of the FM3. So looking now at the base plate, so obviously when you've done the whole film, you want to rewind it, you press in this rewind button which clicks up, and that releases the advanced sprocket inside, so you can then lift up the lever and rewind the film, and you can feel the tension on the film as you're rewinding it, and you'll feel it release off the sprocket, so you can then open up the back and take the film out and hopefully go and get some nice prints processed. It actually makes it more awkward to take the cartridge out with that spring there. So also looking at the base plate, other things you've got on there are the motor drive contacts. That's the electrical contacts for the motor drive, and you've also got the actual shutter firing button for the motor drive and the advance sprocket for the motor drive as well. Moving around to the front of the camera, you've got a self timer which you can set, it says in the manual, from 4 to 10 seconds, but it's basically just a guess. If you move it all the way around, it's 10 seconds. And you can cancel that before you fire the shutter just by moving it back. You can hear it resetting itself, but obviously once you fire the shutter with the self timer moved, it will carry on and fire the shutter when it gets to the end. So basically, to use the self timer, put it down, you've got the shutter, and you can fire the button. Now I will point out, with these cameras, same with the FM2 and the FE2, when you use the self timer, it does put up the mirror before it fires the shutter. So the mirror goes up first, and it counts down and then fires the shutter, because these cameras don't have a mirror lock-up feature. Now you've also got next to that a depth of field preview button for checking the what's in focus through the viewfinder. You can see that operates the lever inside the lens mount. At the top here is the ADR window, which obviously lets you see through the viewfinder the aperture that's set on the lens. To the right of that, on the front, you've got the PC sync socket, you've got the lens release button, and another new feature of this camera, which is introduced with this camera, is a exposure compensation for the flash, which is this little button here, which can be awkward to use because basically you need to press it with your thumb, and in general you would use that for working the lens, but if you want to use this flash exposure compensation, you need to press that in with your thumb, and it gives you a -1 EV on the flash output. And you might say, well, why would you use that? And Nikon say it's if the subject's far away or on the edge of the viewfinder, but I think another way you could use it is if the subject is very close, because then sometimes the flash can be over bright, so I would use it in that circumstance as well. Also, looking on the back, you've got another new feature of this camera, this model, the exposure lock button. And on the FE2 it used to be incorporated into the self timer, where you press the self timer lever in, but obviously that made it awkward to use with the motor drive fitted. Whereas on this model you can half hold down the shutter, point at the subject that you want exposing correctly, holding the exposure lock button, reframe, focus and shoot, and it holds that exposure and it does show you that correct display in the viewfinder as well. So now for a new first for me, I have to excuse it because it's not perfect, but I'm going to look inside the viewfinder. So this is with the standard K3 screen fitted, which is a split image rangefinder spot surrounded by a microprism collar, and then around that is a 12mm reference circle, and that represents the 60% centre weighted measuring area. It's very similar to display to the FE2, as you can see. On the left hand side you've got the shutter speed scale represented by what's set on the shutter dial. At the top you can just work out the ADR window that would show the aperture when you've got lens fitted. If I press the shutter button halfway down, you will see this shutter speed the camera will set is showing on the left hand side now, which is 1/25 of a second. At the top you can see two lights flashing, and that's because the camera's set at DX setting and I haven't got film loaded, so it's flashing to warn me of that. And the lights you can see flashing on the left is the exposure compensation light. If you've got that changed, that light comes on, and on the right is the flash ready light. Now if I change the shutter dial to another setting, take it off of A, you can see the blue marker which shows now the shutter speed I'm setting on the dial at the top, and to get the correct exposure obviously I line up that blue marker with the exposure needle to give you the correct exposure. Now with the FM3A they introduced 3 new focusing screens as well, a K3, B3 and E3, which are very similar to the FE2s and FM2 models, and in fact you can interchange focusing screens between them without any exposure compensation. But the new models are improved, they are clearer and seem better for focusing, and also a feature which is in this standard one, the K1, which has the split image, it is a lot better to work with, because when you fit lenses with small apertures like telephoto lenses, etc., what you find on the FM2 FE2 is that the middle, the centre goes black basically, so you can't use it for focusing and you can't see very well at all, whereas with this focusing screen it just goes dim from about f4.5 upwards. It darkens the display but you can still see it at all times. That's a really good feature of these new focusing screens. To remove them, there's a little catch there, and there's a special tool supplied when you buy these screens that just pulls that catch and it drops down a frame with the focusing screen on, which can remove with the tweezers provided and swap the screen. They are very delicate, you have to be very careful of course not to mark them and scratch them. So no compensation required if you swap screens, and which is good of course, and you can use the older screens if you wish, but I would imagine you're going to use that advantage of the split image not blackening out. So the last thing to show you is lenses. It uses the AI mount, so you need a lens with a AI mount, and what do I mean by that is, if you look at the base of a Nikon lens, that's the actual part that goes against the mount itself, what you'll see on these lenses, you've got a indent. This area here, it's got an indent, which is the ridge for coupling with the prong on the camera body, which is this. As you can see, that moves, it's sprung and it goes round as you turn the aperture on the lens, so that engages inside that little ridge there, so it can read the aperture on the lens you've got set. Now it don't have to be a manual focus lens, because AI lenses were produced from 1977 onwards, but they come in different guises. You can have a AI, AIS or AF, AFD, AFS or AFI lenses. They've all got these ridges in. What you can't use is a G lens, which has a flat mount, and if you try to use a G lens, basically it will, you can't change the aperture of course on the camera, and when you try and take a picture it will just stop down to the minimum aperture, so that's pretty useless. So to mount the lens, just line up the dots, turn it on. Now you don't need the coupling prongs, which I've got fitted to this lens. I've only got that fitted because I can use that with my f2. It doesn't need that prong, as I say, it just needs that ridge on the AI lens itself. So that's with a lens fitted. It's my favourite lens at the moment with 50mm 1.2. Now just to close this overview review, just something I noticed about this camera which is not on any of the other FM3A models, is the way they design the pentaprism. If you look at the front, it's got a nice triangular shape, which to me tells me that they tried to duplicate a little bit the first manual focus SLR they made, which is the Nikon F, and I just think it's very nice of Nikon to go that little step further and give it that little look at the edge. Looks very nice, I think. So that's it for now. We've enjoyed this look at the FM3, so it's been a bit long, but I've tried to make it comprehensive and just stuck to the camera, etc. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for looking.